All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. We're going to turn 17 years old in February. I don't feel that old, but we've been doing this stuff for a long time. And what's old is new again, folks. I have to tell you, the discipline of data management has been around, of course, forever and a day. But in the last 40 years, it really has taken off. And especially in the last few years, it's just become white hot, in part because of AI, in part because of organizations trying to leverage the power of AI. But AI is just one small part of the business landscape. And the bigger part of it is, I think, the most important part, and that's processes. Because a business is basically a collection of people, rules, processes, products, services. That's about it. And the processes are crucial. And a lot of times they're taken for granted. So you have these big systems like enterprise resource planning systems, ERPs, like you would get from SAP, for example, or Oracle or IBM, and there are lots of other smaller ones out there. And they have traditionally been the systems used to track products, to order products, to make sure that things are working properly. And then you have all sorts of other systems around that, customer databases, prospect databases, marketing, all these other different things. But at the core level, it's always a set of processes working with data being managed by people. Well, a few years ago, something came out called process mining. And the first time I took a briefing on this was from a guy who was with Celonis at the time, and they're one of the leaders in the space. I was floored because what you could do is track the data footprints to figure out what the real process looks like. Because to the user, it's typically transparent. You just enter an order and wait for something to come back. If it doesn't come back, uh-oh, we got a problem. What happened? Call IT, figure something out. Well, that's not a very efficient way to do business. And what we found with process mining is that many times the processes are pretty complex and they hit multiple different systems, like maybe a system to run a credit check, for example, or maybe a system to pull the customer information or get ancillary information. So the point is that the process is not as clean cut as you thought it was. And it's also now not just in a black box, because in an SAP environment, it's kind of inside of a black box. You just have to trust that it gets done. So when I realized that with these new technologies, you could actually mine the processes and learn and see how they're actually working and map them out and then optimize them and then even write back to the operational systems, that's when I almost fell off my chair. I'm like, all right, that just turned the job of process analyst from the worst job in the world to one of the best jobs in the world. Because before that time, the process analyst would sit there and look at this complex set of processes and have great ideas. Then they'd have to call someone in operations and be like, hey, could you change X, Y, and Z? And they would say, no, leave us alone. I'm like, okay, well, then I guess I'll go back to looking at the processes. I don't know. Point is, they didn't have any capacity to change something, and now you do. So now we're in this really interesting world where you can not only mine processes and map them, but you can change them, you can optimize them, you can explain to people what's happening. Long story short, lots of really good stuff going on. We have a couple very bright people on the show for you today. We've got Dan Grady of Information Builders for years. Now he's over at ServiceNow, and Lugish Schrott, who is with Process Science. So they are a software company that does process mining. And maybe I'll throw it over to Dan first to kind of get us into the mix here. So Dan, you've been around almost as long as I have, maybe, so you've seen how these things have evolved over the years. I think this door opening to process mining, and especially, like I said, writing back, was a huge shift, a major inflection point that is very good news for businesses and for business processes. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think just we go back to the analytics days. One of the things that every organization has dashboards, right? There's tons of dashboards out there, right? What's interesting, those dashboards typically track KPIs and things like the volume of work that you're doing and the velocity, right? Your closure times, your resolution times, whatever you might be tracking. What's interesting about those dashboards, and one of the things that I've learned in my time here is those dashboards are good at asking and answering the what types of questions that are going on inside of an organization. Like I was just telling those types of questions. But every leader in the world, one of the things that happens and they get a dashboard like that, that you realize information is one of the most addictive and contagious things out there. You give somebody a little bit and they always want more. So the first thing that happens when you get a dashboard like that out the door, somebody in leadership starts asking that process analyst that you just mentioned questions like, well, why are we missing our CSET and ESET targets? Why are we missing our closure times, right? Why are they trending in that direction? Like, why? And the answers to
Right.
those follow-up why questions, they don't live in those dashboards. They live in process mining. Process mining really allows people to start asking and answering all those follow-up why questions to what they're seeing in their higher level dashboards. Like, where is the
Mhm.
process getting stuck? Where is there unnecessary rework? Where are we spending and wasting the most time? Which vendors are speeding us up and which ones are slowing us down? Or I have a personal favorite. I think every customer I've ever worked with has always asked me for the same report I like to call the finger pointing report. Everybody wants to know, like, who's holding on to the work the longest? I need to know who's holding on to the work the longest. Or if you're more glass half full, we call that the opportunity to improve report. Those are
Mm.
all the things that now are available to us via process mining. It's that next level of depth beyond what they traditionally are getting from their dashboards.
Yeah, that's such an excellent description too, and it really is, I think, eye-opening to see the processes. And the example that I saw several years ago that just floored me did involve a credit check. And as I recall, when they actually ran the report and can see the process end to end, there's this huge amount of time being spent on this. Like, what's that? Well, that's the credit check. Well, it's like, well, for 85% of our customers, we know they're gonna pay, so why are we even doing this? So it's like, "No, no, no, like, put that separate, have that in a separate part of the process, and let's just go without it here," and boom, I mean, they, like, saved all this time, but you wouldn't have known that unless you could see what was happening, and that's the point, right, Dan?
Yeah. Oh, so you mentioned credit check. Absolutely. Another one that you see across all organizations is any sort of request that they have. There's usually an approval step, right, that has to take place. There's so much time wasted waiting for approvals to take place. One of my favorite examples is we saw one situation in which there was an organization that had two levels of approval on printer toner requests. And that
Hmm.
second level of approval was adding 3 days to the closure time. Like, do we really need two levels of approval on printer toner request? They thought not, but they didn't even know it was even there. Like, it was just it kind of like they chose the out of the box option or whatever it was. And we're able to reclaim 3 days, right? And sometimes, most of the time, just like your credit check example, if you can start seeing that things are being approved like 99.9% of the time, but yet they're adding 7 years to the overall closure time for a month's worth of work, like, why do we even have these things? So
Wow.
it's that level of visibility that really helps people start to streamline things and recognize. You very often you think about people talking about process mining in the sense of let's find automation opportunities. Sometimes it's good to help you identify human things that you should just stop doing to speed up the process.
Right. Well, that there you go. And you think back before we had process mining, you would do things like swim lanes and stuff like this, and you would actually design out what the process is supposed to look like. But that was offline. In other words, you would just draw some Visio chart or something and say, okay, this is how it works. And then you just trusted that was actually happening. Well, like I mentioned, a lot of times the ERP is a big part of it, but it's not the whole part of it. There are other bits and pieces on the outside. And until you can actually see what's really happening, you can't really optimize anything. And that's why I was just so excited about those. I was like, oh my goodness, now you can actually see, you can watch because typically what you're doing is you're analyzing log files to see, okay, the ERP did this, the database did this happened, and you're tracking those footprints of data through the log files to see what actually happened, right? And then you dynamically build out this process map because once you can see it and understand, especially that time component or even the cost component, for example, that's when you're like, "Oh my goodness, why did we do it this way?" Like, until you could see it, you couldn't know that, right, Dan?
Yeah, that's it's the reality. It's one of the most interesting situations to be in. I always like to joke, and this is a bad 90s movie reference, but the movie Jurassic Park,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
scene in Jurassic Park where the guy that owns the island, he comes
Yeah.
in and he's watching the baby raptor being born, and like he's like, I like to be there every time a new baby dinosaur is born. I feel the same way with our customers in process mining. I love
Oh,
to
that's
be there
cute.
when they get to see their reality for the first time, because
Wow.
the colorful language that sometimes comes out because they've never even seen it, like you said, they designed it one way, but the reality is most work isn't going through the design path, and that's going to have a negative impact on the experience that people requesting a service are having, as well as the people trying to deliver it. Right? Most
Right.
organizations really struggle and spend tons of money, right, to get to that reality. Like there's so much. I always like to joke that, they run a whole bunch of reports, and then for some reason, some customers like to print those reports out still and go through them line by line with a highlighter. Don't know why they do that. It may involve, right, holding in-person or virtual workshops where they're taking a whole bunch of sticky notes and putting them on a wall somewhere, and then somebody has to take a picture of those sticky notes on the wall and post it to some internal site because, like, hey, did work really happen unless we have a picture of sticky notes on a wall somewhere? It may involve bringing in third-party consultants, super helpful, but last I checked, they weren't free. And
Right.
then even when they get through all that, they still have to get internal alignment on the optimal path forward. And at the speed in which most organizations are trying to move these days, by the time they get through all that, the optimal path forward may have already changed. Right. And that's
Wow.
the piece where process mining can really accelerate that traditional process improvement process that people have went through in the past with all those manual steps, and quickly get them to that reality of what's happening inside of their worlds. And now that they've got that accelerated visibility into the reality, that speeds up our ability to make the necessary changes and adjustments to the process.
Yeah, that's very, very well put, and I think you're exactly right. And now, once you have that, and again, it's because you're seeing what's really happening. And maybe Lucas Schwart, I'll bring you in to talk about this from process science. Seeing is believing, and until you can see what's really happening, and that's what's so exciting, really about this whole observability trend in the marketplace. There are lots of types of observability we can now see, looking at log files, looking at that's usually one of the main sources of information, but looking where data is, where did it get lost in the pipeline somewhere? It used to be, well, I sent it, you didn't get it yet, like the postal service, right? But now you can see, like, think about an Uber car when you watch it driving towards your house. Like, there he is, he's around the corner. That is observability. And once you can observe these processes, that's when business can reinvent, right, Lucas?
Yeah, exactly. And like Dan said, I mean, coming from a background in process optimization and consulting, we did exactly that. Yeah, we went to a company, we asked them, hey, how is your process looking like? We asked all the different people and bring together the information that we needed to show the leaders, hey, this is how your people tell or told us your purchasing process looks like. But with process mining, you do it in a complete, it's 100% objective. You look at the data that they have, you look at the log files, you look at the data that never, that people back in the years, they just thought, oh no, this is taking up space in my database. We don't need these log files. But now we know that this is the trash from like 15 years ago. It's now like the gold that we take out of the systems to really show them, hey, this is your process. This is how your process is performed. And there's no way of, no, it's not. It is.
Right.
And like Dan said, it looking at the expression of a client seeing their process the first time, it's great. A lot of the times we hear, no, it's not our process, it's not our data. Yeah, if you look at it yeah, but and then of course they look in some orders, some cases, and you show them that it is, they start to believe, and then it really starts happening, like, yeah, looking deeper into it and seeing, oh wow, what is happening here? And
That's
that's like,
so that's so interesting. And you use the perfect word, I think, objective. This is not our opinion about what's happening. This is what the machines are telling you. Yeah, I came up with a line many years ago on one of these shows. I just said, the machines don't lie. They're just doing something. And when you have these log files or other reporting mechanisms, then they're telling you what they're doing, and you can see what's happening. Now, we have large language models to contend with, and they are probabilistic, and this is another whole wrinkle in the works. But all of that aside, the bottom line is that in companies, when systems are doing things to deliver products or services or even analyze something, that is all machine language talking to each other, and you're just tapping into that to show them what's happening, right, Lucas?
yeah, exactly. So everything that has, so you talked about ERP systems like SAP. Yeah, people work with SAP. So if you look at their purchasing department, people working with SAP all day. They put in orders, they put in whatever they need to do to fulfill their work. And like you said, in the end, a new part comes to the company, they produce something, they sell something, but in the system itself, everything that they do will be stored and describes the process end to end for each specific order, for each specific product that needs to be created, or for each specific service request that you have in your company. Yes, so everything is stored based on what people did and not what people think. And that is like one big part, because, and it's not to blame someone, but if you ask someone what they are doing, it's human that they will leave out some information because they just don't think about that they did it this way. And oftentimes what we see is, you see the process as it has been performed, and you will get information and see that the process has been performed differently to what you modeled it. Yeah, so you have your BPMN models and say this should look like this, but people are doing completely different, but maybe it's even better. It's faster, it's cheaper. But most of the times people don't report that back and say, hey, we should change that, because they just do it.
Right. That's interesting.
And
that's a good
with
point.
that,
Well,
you
and
have
this is
to, yeah, a good point on keeping that conversation or starting that conversation.
That's the piece that I think is two points to double click on. One is the fact that this is data, like it's not debatable, right? And one of the things that I think process mining has really done for organizations that are using it properly is there's no shortage of opportunities to improve within every single organization that's out there, but they don't have the resources to act on all those things at once. So you really need the data to help you prioritize which things to focus on first. Where are the biggest opportunities to reclaim some time within this process? And having that data instead of just somebody's opinion, right? We used to always make that claim, right? Like great, if we have opinions, that's awesome. But if I have data, that's what I'm going with. So having the data about the size of the opportunity is a factual way to kind of have these conversations. The other thing, and since we're coming up on Thanksgiving time, that I think process mining is kind of very much like Thanksgiving in the sense that it brings people together. Now that we have this set of data, right, it starts to bring parts of the organization together that historically have not been able to talk because they have a common thing to kind of talk about. And now that they're sitting around a process map, let's say, having a conversation, that really allows people from different areas of the process to have empathy for one another, and it really streamlines their ability to make the necessary changes that they haven't. In the past, it's always been harder to have that conversation.
That's right. Well, when you can see it and talk about it and visualize it, and you know that it's data driven, this is from the systems themselves. It's not my opinion. This is what our process mining algorithm found, and it's showing us right here. That's when you can make a difference. Well, don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio. We're off to the races here, talking all about process mining. Your host here, Eric Cavanaugh. I've got Dan Grady and Lucas Schrodt on the line. He's with Process Science, and Dan is with ServiceNow these days. And Dan, in that last segment, you made a really good analogy to Thanksgiving and how people all come together and you break bread and you talk to your family members. Maybe you haven't seen some in a while and you learn new things. Well, that's kind of what these process maps do. And they provide a very constructive map to look at and then understand. It's just like having a map in the old days. Where's the treasure? Oh, it's over here. Like, okay, well, when you can see the processes, the amount of time spent, the amount, and if you really get deep, the TCO, total cost of ownership. Well, this process, part of the process is costing us a lot of money. How can we change that? Once you can see it and view it as almost like Lego blocks that are coming together, that's when it becomes very apparent. Also, I'll throw it to Dan first, and then we'll bring Lucas back in. Also, you can figure out where you can swap things out. Maybe your cloud provider has some particular technology they're just rolling out where you have a bespoke solution that you built. Maybe that's when you can swap something out. I remember, speaking of information builders, I had this conversation a long time ago with the gentleman that you mentioned. I can't remember his name now. The not Jerry Cohen, but the other guy.
John Senior.
Yes, John Senior. Yeah. He was the one who talked to me. I was doing research. This is 20 years ago. Okay. I remember I had this conversation about service-oriented architecture and open source technology. And remember, like fine grained services and coarse grained services, he was the one who really evangelized this stuff for me. And I realized, hey, this is very interesting because if you do have a true service orientation, and of course now it's mostly Kubernetes, which is similar conceptually, but different in terms of the actual function. But when you have this service oriented mindset, you should be able to plug and play component parts more easily. And that's kind of where we are these days in the cloud world. I mean, not entirely. ERPs are still very sticky and very complex, and it can be difficult to kind of pull something out of one of those environments. But nonetheless, when you can see the map and you have this service-oriented vision or workflow, that's when you can start changing things and then measuring how it works. Does it work faster now or slower? And that's when you could actually change the business, right, Dan?
That, oh, 100%. It's almost from a ServiceNow perspective, what we see is within a business process, most people are running their workflows at a macro level through ServiceNow, right? So if you take let's say an onboarding type of scenario, right? People run their onboarding process through ServiceNow, and at certain ports of the onboarding process, you might call out to a Workday, or you might call out to an Oracle, you might call out to do certain parts of that process. What's interesting to us is we get to process mine I'll call it the macro workflow, right? So the
Hmm.
overall macro workflow, and then we can start to see where the inefficient steps are from a macro level. And then when we see, oh, that's in this thing over here, let's go and now mine Workday or mine Oracle or whatever it is, and just do very targeted analysis. And what you really start to see is situations where yes, there's integrations in play here in many cases, but you still have situations in which people are still swivel chairing from one system to another the data as part of a process. Process mining is very good at showing us those situations where, hey, we thought we had automated maybe 100% of this process, but we're now starting to still see that there's steps in this process that could be automated, whether it be with an integration or if we're talking about maybe an older system, you have to use an RPA bot to move the data around. But you really start to see for those more like the involved workflows that you're talking about, Eric, you really start to
Hmm.
see where the automation opportunities or integration opportunities still exist, because they tend to be the steps in the process that run a little bit slower than the ones that are already automated or integrated.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And before the show, you had mentioned something, Dan, and I'll throw it over to Lucas in a second. That at ServiceNow, you already have the log files. Like you've got mountainous volumes of log files, right? So in some organizations, you have to bring in external technology to start mapping it out, and you have to connect it. I've heard the Achilles heel. What I've heard from Salona's competitors, to be honest, is that it takes a while to get all that set up and to get all the collections moving and getting all that data into place before you can see really what's happening. But at ServiceNow, I mean, you've got voluminous mountains of log files, right? So you've already
No,
got that data there.
yeah, I'll go back to my Thanksgiving analogy. So there's a lot of similarities between process mining and Thanksgiving, and then one large difference is the preparation, right?
Hmm.
When you think about Thanksgiving, the person hosting has to do a lot of preparation. And it's the same with process mining traditionally. I'd say 80 to 85% of the traditional process mining work is in data extraction, manipulation, and preparation to move it into that process mining solution, right? And
Mm-hmm.
your typical process mining project with something not ServiceNow, I would say, is about 4 to 6 weeks. And most of that time is in the data work. We eliminate that from a process mining perspective on the ServiceNow platform because, like you said, we know where that data lives. Those processes and workflows that are running through ProcessNow, we know exactly where that data lives. We have direct access to it. So our
Mm-hmm.
customers literally can turn process mining on the ServiceNow platform and start seeing the reality of the workflows in a matter of minutes. It's a game-changing experience for people that have experience with other process mining solutions. They see that and they're like, well, this is amazing, right? It's like it's such a mind-blowing experience, and it's really fun to watch.
That's really cool. And the thing I like about it the most is again, and I want to write about this, but I think future success in this industry is largely going to revolve around centers of gravity. And you're a center of gravity. I mean, ServiceNow is a center of gravity. Wherever you have lots and lots of data, wherever lots of processes touch, that's going to be a center of gravity. Snowflake is a center of gravity. Databricks is a center of gravity. So there you have these different environments, but the more you can layer on to where someone's already working, and Lucas, I'll throw this over to you, the better off you're going to be because no one wants to bounce from one system to another. It's just annoying. I'm annoyed by it myself. Oh, what was that person's name? Let me jump over to LinkedIn, like look that up. It just takes up time, and it disrupts the sort of fluid nature of thought processes and of where I'm trying to go with something. And you want as few encumbrances or hurdles between your thought process and what you're able to execute on the job. And Lucas, you had mentioned something early in the pre-call as well that I thought was very interesting, where you said, look, we will try to insert ourselves into whichever analytic environment the company's already using. So Tableau or Tibco, Spotfire, whatever it is, they're already there doing their analysis. So let's weave our technology into that environment. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so like Dan said, it's if you look at some sort of analytics platform or BI platforms, you look at or people look at these reports if they use them quite often. Yeah, they look at these reports, they see how many products they have produced or what is the times in total. But like Dan said, the next question always is, why is it happening? Yeah, why do we need to, or why is this one taking longer? Why were we slower than in the last year and so on? And if you now start to shift to a different solution to analyze the next layer, it's always harder for people to adopt. Yeah, it's I need to log into a different system. I need to do it somewhere else. Do I really want to do it? And people don't, it's not the same interaction. It's not the same level of people using what can be done. And that's, like you said, what we are doing is we are integrating our process mining solution directly into BI platforms, into analytics platforms, because what we say in the end, it doesn't matter if it's called process mining, if it's
Right.
called BI or whatsoever. If you are able
Right.
to
That's
see,
funny.
yeah, if a lot of I know from a lot of customers that they don't even tell the analysts that they have something completely new in place. Yeah, because why? If they see that they have new information, great. If they needed to buy something new for it, okay, but why tell them? Yeah, so it's
Right.
you just changed the BI report, you just changed the dashboard, and now you're able to see your processes. And that's what we are doing, because again, like Dan said, having or looking at a platform where you're also where you already are and you're already analyzing stuff, just put more information in there and don't shift to something else. Yeah, why are we building lakeouts? Why are we building data lakes? Because we want to have the data in one place. We don't want to go into 5 different places, 50 different places. We want to have the data in one place so we can do the analysis there. And the
That's
same is
so
what we're doing with the process analytics part, with the process mining.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Like all that data doesn't make any sense unless it's in context. And usually the context is in someone's head and they kind of understand the context and they can put meaning to the numbers. But the truth of the matter is that these processes it's not the lifeblood, right? Like data is the new oil, data is what flows through these things, but it's the channels, it's the actual architecture of your business. That's what it is. Your process maps are the actual de facto architecture of your business. So, in order to change anything, you have to understand what they are, or you're just creating additional forked off processes, right? Where it's like then it becomes this total spaghetti nightmare. I see Dan nodding his head. So, the thing is, once you can see the architecture, and that's really what it is. It's the business architecture or your processes. Once you can see that, then you can start asking questions. Oh, well, wait a minute. What if we just insert this process here and do this one over there? Like, oh my goodness, we can have our consulting firm do that or whatever. You can offload stuff, but until you can really understand those maps, the data is not that useful, right? Right, Dan?
Well, I think that one of the things it's interesting because you often get this question like when should I start using things like process mining? Like how long? And like my opinion is that the how soon is too soon to know you have an opportunity to improve? Like if you're rolling out a new process, why wait 6 months to start looking at how it's actually performing? Wouldn't you like to know in the first 2 weeks that
Right.
72% of the work is taking the wrong path or the less efficient path? Again, advantage to being kind of like an in-platform thing is that it's really easy to get started and turn on. Like we can start looking at it should be in parallel to as you roll out new services and new processes. This is one of the first things that you should turn on. So that's, like one of the things that I like to talk about is just how it should speed innovation in organizations. You should be able to innovate faster because you don't really feel like you need to get the process 100% right the first time when you roll it out, because you're going to have
Right.
visibility into where to change it almost immediately moving forward. That's a big piece of this. I just want to touch one more time on the piece about putting the information, whether it be via a BI solution that a customer is already using, or an in-platform solution where the process owners and people are actually doing work. A phrase that I once heard somebody say back in the day is like, I want to spend more time creating the news, not reporting the news. And that's
Oh,
one of the big differences you get when you start, or you're able to embed these insights in the flow of people's day-to-day lives. You can actually start to influence their behaviors and the decisions that they make. If they're not, if you're not putting the insights right in the directly of their flow of their lives, there's a good chance they're going to miss it. And what they're not going to, you're not going to have the same ability to actually influence their decisions and create the news. Again,
wow.
I always come back to a benefit of being an in-platform is I am where the people are. And that
Right.
allows us to kind of influence behaviors and change decisions more at
Well,
a
and you made
higher
a
rate
really
than other places.
Yeah, right. You made a really, really good point. I'll throw it over to Lucas to comment on this, saying that once you can see the processes, you realize you don't have to get it perfect the first time out because you know you'll be able to change it. I think a lot of times when people think through, all right, what is this going to look like? They want to etch it in stone. I guess because that way it'll always work, I think is the theory. But you're never, especially when things are changing so rapidly. I mean, when you can buy data, rent data, when you can rent cloud. I mean, goodness gracious, like now in the cloud, you can test out of these very, very quickly. Just ramp up in your AWS or Azure or wherever it is that you are and test out ideas. That's an interesting point. What do you think about that, Lucas? That once you can see it, you won't be so beholden to trying to get it perfect the first time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I 100% agree. A lot of times people think of process mining, at least when we talk to people completely new to it. Let's say, for example, SMEs in Europe, they've never heard of it, and then they always think of it's just going to replace the typical one-time process analytics. Yeah, you get someone in, and then you have your process mining being done once, and then you never look at it again. But that's not how it's working, because you have it integrated and you constantly get new data and you constantly see the changes. How do the changes that you've made in the process based on the first insights on your
Right.
process mining, you then start to change the process, and then you
That's
see
funny.
how do these changes affect my process. So it's a circle. Yeah? It's not something like you do it once and then you stop looking at it. That's not how it's done. That's not what it's built for. It's built for continuously looking at the changes, looking at the process, and see if the changes that you made really affect the process in that way that you wanted it to affect. I mean, maybe there are
Right.
changes that you think are in the right direction, and then after 2 weeks, 4 weeks, you see that they are not. Fine, but you had an idea, you changed something. So 100% agree on what Dan said. Why wait 6 months if you can start right away and have like a frequent yeah, changes on, or seeing what the changes really made up for.
Well,
Or
right. Well, I mean, when you can see it, it's kind of like coaching let's say a basketball team or a soccer team or something. You're watching it all the time and you're coming up with new plays. You're watching the defense and kind of figuring out, they're really strong in their cornerback game today. Let's go with a run game. You have to make these changes constantly, and the best teams do that. That's why the best teams after halftime come back and beat the crap out of their opponents because they went back there and they distilled everything and they came up with a plan and then they executed it. Well, folks, don't touch the dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio with a fantastic show all about process mining. We've got Dan Grady and Lucas Schrott on the line today. Dan is from ServiceNow. Lucas is from Process Science, I believe is what they call their company. Process mining, that's the topic. And Dan, I'll throw it over to you first. In that coaching analogy that I gave, this is real time, right? And it's like the competition is the other team, and you have to figure out what they're doing. And that's really the case in the business world today. I mean, things are happening so fast. New competitors come online. companies digitally transform. It's not always a good thing. Digital transformation I had some bad experiences in the past where customer experience is a casualty in digital transformation. It's like you go into the McDonald's and they want you to use the big thing. Well, that's fine if you just have normal stuff, but if you have anything special, it's going to take you 20 more minutes. Like, did that improve the process? I don't think so. If it's longer and I'm unhappy at the end of it, then it's not an improvement. But you had a good analogy for something, Dan. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, well, we were just talking about kind of the constant change. You brought it up again, right? Constant state of change. Every now and then you get the question, as Lucas was mentioning in the last segment, like, hey, I'm just going to need to use this once and I'm going to fix the process and I'm never going to need to
Right.
look at it again. And it's like, I always like to compare process mining to like a metal detector. Like if you think about every organization as they're a beach of inefficiencies, right? It's just a whole beach. And what process mining allows you to do is walk around and it's going to beep louder in some places and softer in others. And you're going to then have to dig a little bit further, but you dig in to find and see whether it's an opportunity or not to improve. And yeah, you're still going to have to dig a little bit, but isn't it better to have the metal detector than not have the metal detector in that scenario, right? It's a huge improvement. And the other piece of that is if you think about the metal detector, the guy or gal, when I always like to go to the beach. I live on Long Island and I like to be in the morning. There's always that one guy or gal with the metal detector,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And on the beach. And guess what? That person, they're there the next day and the next day. And why do they keep coming back? Well, because the waves are constantly washing new things up onto the shore for them to find and discover. And I feel like businesses are the same way. Like you're in a constant state of change. Like you were saying, there's new competitors, there's new services that's rolling out. You're getting new employees who may not have used the process before and they're adapting to it. So there's this constant state of change, and process mining really helps you if you do it more regularly instead of a once or twice a year type of science project, right?
Right.
Stay on top of the changes and make those little tweaks and change things along with the way that the business is changing.
Yeah. And I'll give another analogy and throw it over to Lucas. Think about these race car drivers and how you can work on the tires, you can work on the engine, you can work on the suspension. There are all kinds of different things that you can do, especially for different courses. Like you're going to do a different racetrack, then you may want better suspension. The point is, like, there are always ways to improve, like Dan says, and I think that's a fantastic analogy, this whole, metal detector thing, because you are finding cool stuff and something may be relatively cool, something may be super cool, it might be worth a lot or a little, but at least it's something. And in my opinion, one of the most important things you can do these days is prioritize your time. What are you doing in your day every day? Because you look at like large language models, this is a very powerful engine that can help you get 80% of your code, at least a basic script written, and then you can fine tune stuff. Well, that is a major process change. Like now, a lot of people are using that as part of their day-to-day workflow. And this is why I think process mining is so important because it is testing the fabric of the business itself. What do you think, Lucas?
Yeah, exactly. So you talked about prioritizing, and of course, you will find a lot of stuff not working the way that you think it should.
Right.
Never had that someone looked at the process and said it's 100% like we thought it would be or like we
Isn't that
modeled
funny?
it to be. Yeah, it's not going to be that way. I'm not going to blame it. It's just it is how it is. It is how people work. Yeah, it's and with that, constantly looking at it and seeing what the problems are and then going ahead and prioritizing on which one I want to focus. Yeah, which one is the one that is giving the most value when putting in time, to automate it, when putting in time to change how people are working on it. Yeah, of course, automation is always one part, but many tasks we still have people working on that, or we have machines that we will need to set up differently. So it's always going to be steps that you are able to do and which ones are more effective than the others. And because you talked about LLMs and AI in general, just a little in that direction, of course, with AI coming or getting better so fast, it's also easier for us as vendors to put in something that will give you direct action points and tell you what can you do in the process? What can you change, and what has the highest score in getting the process better? Yeah, so combining the data that you get from process mining with AI, you are able to then really give people what we like to call them action points, to really say, hey, this is your list with different scores, different how is it going to affect the process, and then you can really look into them and prioritize on which you want to go first.
Actually, a comment on that one, because this is a data show, right? The important thing there is, like, when we think about it, Lucas just touched on an important point, like the actionable information, the actionable data. What you find, I think, in a lot of scenarios is the actual actionable data isn't necessarily the structured data that people are familiar with, right? Like, the process mining is great at kind of showing us where the bottlenecks are, and there's a lot of structure there. But in terms of what to do about a bottleneck or a rework loop or whatever it is, the information that guides us in terms of the action we potentially could take very often lives in unstructured data, like the work notes that somebody is putting into the system, the comments they're making. So being able to actually get down to the details, into the individual records that are flowing through the systems, is a really important piece from a data perspective when it comes to process mining. And I don't know that all process mining solutions get to that level of depth, because they are not the system of action for folks. They don't actually necessarily always have access to that work note type level data, this unstructured data, because not to get into it doesn't always get moved over into those other platforms. And it might be one of the reasons why, it's, again, advantage as an in-platform solution. We do have that level of access to the data that will power a lot of the stuff that a large language model will be able to help us guide us to.
Yeah, this is really fascinating stuff, and what's interesting to me is that we are moving at this breakneck speed right now in terms of innovation and leveraging cloud platforms, leveraging large language models, leveraging process mining, and as Dan says, when it's in platform, like we already have that, just flip that switch and turn it on. I mean, I really do view process mining and process management as central to digital transformation. A lot of people will refer to the automation side. That's obviously important. That is the ideal goal of something, is to automate it as best that you can, but you can't automate everything. But being able to see the maps and understand the flow of work is really compelling. I mean, it is the workflow. How are you going to change your workflow? What can you do differently to optimize that? This is where process mining comes into play. We got 2 minutes left in this segment, Lucas. I'll throw it over to you. And I love that you're sitting inside these different environments. What do you, just give us a 2-minute version of what you deliver inside those environments? Is it access to the maps themselves, or how does that work?
Yeah, so what we deliver is everything from the data that you have in your BI systems coming from different sources. So because if you look at your BI dashboards, you have data from all kinds of different systems, because that is what you need to really give people insights on their day-to-day business. And what we do with this data is we do the whole transformation and extraction, or it's more transformation at that point, from all the data from the different systems, to really create that end-to-end process analysis, to really show the insights. So it's pretty much, you have all your data in place in your BI, and then what we do for on that is get the process analytics, of course, it's the typical process maps. It's stuff like root cause analysis. So what are main influence factors for specific problems to occur? So Dan talked about reworks, talked about loops. What are main influence factors for specific activities to occur? Yeah, why do I have a second line of approvals? Why do I not have specific approvals? Yeah, that's another big part. If I look at purchasing process and I'm missing approval steps,
Right.
might be a big problem, right? If you're able to, you ship something on the invoice of a company with like $10,000 or more to your home. Great for you, not so great for the company. I've seen that. Yeah, and it's not
Wow.
that you have companies where that happens. And
All
that
right, well,
is
folks, we'll
everything
pick
we've
this up
seen.
after the break. We'll be right back. Stand by. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on DM Radio. We've been talking all about process mining with Lucas Short and of Process Science and Dan Grady of ServiceNow. And Lucas, you were kind of finishing up your point there, and I'll throw out some thought that I had and let you comment on this. I remember learning a long time ago in the banking world when you have your close every month, you have to close out all your accounts, and this is a big part of the process. You're closing your financials for the month. And what I learned from this very smart guy was exception handling is the bear. Like you automate most of it, most of the accounts are fine, but the ones that aren't, that's where it gets really sticky and can take a lot of time and just tremendous amounts of effort to sort through transactions that weren't covered or something that wasn't done properly. Those are exceptions. That's where, and there's an old expression, the exception proves the rule. It doesn't make sense in modern language because they're like, what do you mean the exception proves the rule? But back in the day, the word prove meant test. And so in that context, it's very correct. The exception tests the rule. And that's what you're looking for when you're trying to figure out what to optimize, right? Lucas is like, where are we having trouble where it's not even just a bottleneck, but something just goes wrong every month and we have to figure it out. That's where you should focus your process mining efforts, right, Lucas?
Yeah, so you can, it's always these Pareto 80-20 rate, right? You
Yeah.
have 80%, or you get 80% right in 20%, and then the other 20% you need 80% of the time. And it's the same if you look at a process. Of course, a lot of it is good. Yeah, it's not that 100% of the process is not working good. If it would, then the company wouldn't be alive anymore. It's not that they need process mining, but it's
Right.
these 20% that you want to look at. And these 20%, seeing what the problem is in these 20%, that of course where it's where process mining and a lot of data itself comes into play, because you will then be able to see or what happens, and after you see what happens, so for example, why do we always have price changes after we have approved the order?
Interesting.
Why? I mean, that is something that we saw in one of the projects, and that seeing this and then focusing on why is it happening, so what I said, the root causes of it, that really helps you getting faster to also getting better in the last 20% of your problems. Maybe Dan, you also have.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I think this is, I don't want to say that the misconception, but this is very much what process mining is about, right? Is the exceptions or the 20%, as Lucas is saying, because I always like to say, like, if you have a flat tire, you know you have a flat tire, right?
Right.
But what process mining is good at helping us find is all the leaks, little leaks that you have in your tires, and showing you which leaks are bigger than others, so you know which ones to plug first. That's the thing, is like it's going to be a constant stream of leaks that you're focusing on. So I love the 20% versus the 80 type of thing, because most people think, oh, I'm going to start using process mining, I'm going to find. No, you would have already known, right? We're better at finding the exceptions, or process mining is great at helping you find the exceptions. And that 20% is also, there's patterns in there as well. Like it's math and it's data at this point. So solutions will just start to surface your slow transition patterns, right? Oh, look, 85% of your work is taking less than 2 hours to go from a new to in progress state. But there's the 2% over here that on average is taking 8 days. You want to focus in on
Right.
those. Or, hey,
Right.
I see this type of work is being transferred to these 3 teams repetitively every single time it comes in. Why is that happening? Can't we just get it to the right team the first time? So
Right.
very much so, that's where process mining and what's built into a lot of the solutions is this ability to start surfacing the exceptions. So you're not digging all over the place and into things. They're right up there. They get
Yeah.
surfaced, and then you drill down into the individual exceptions to do the deeper dive analysis, especially if you can start exposing, hey, this exception is costing you 7 years for, like, I'll give you one example. It's an approval one again, but I had one customer I was working with. We found that they had 7 years of time waiting for approvals for 7 days of actual work once the approvals got done, right? If you look at the aggregate, and it's like, it's crazy sometimes what you see.
I mean, you bring an excellent point here. And by the way, Lucas, I love the action points concept that you've got there. I think that's very, very clever because that is points on which I can take action. Like what can I actually do? I remember in the risk management world, they talk about control points, which is any point at which some person or machine can take action. I can approve, I can not approve, I can send it back to be refined or whatever. I can take some action, I can do something. And action points are what people want. And just to kind of bring us all together here, I think what you're going to see with AI, I think a lot of the value that AI in particular is going to generate will be through the power of suggestion. And I think what you want to be doing is monitoring these process mining solutions to look for the action points and just notice things, notice patterns like why is this taking so long? And when you can analyze at scale, you can do that sort of thing. 80% of our salespeople get this done in under 5 minutes. But this person over here, it's taking 45 minutes. But wait, that person is also making the biggest sales. So it's like, all right, well, efficiency may not be the most important thing. What is that person doing? Oh, they're doing research into the client every time before they pull the trigger on something. Oh, well, now you're starting to see, and I think it's going to be this confluence of visibility and observability that's going to make or break the winners of the future because you're going to be able to see so much information, so much observability, and you're going to use the large language models to kind of make sense of a lot of that stuff. But a lot of times it's going to come through your suggestions and it's going to be action points that are actionable. Well, folks, look these gentlemen up online. Dan Grady, ServiceNow, formerly Information Builders, one of my favorite companies, and to Lucas Short from Process Science. Send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@dmradio.biz. That comes right to me. We'll talk to you next time, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.